So in another study, which is summarized in a paper which Himal Survira, he's a postdoctoral fellow, he's in Singapore at the moment, Peter Smith and I, Mike Faulkner, we submitted this paper to Globecom, so it's accepted there. And there the cognitive radio is able to transmit at a power which is determined by either the maximum power the cognitive radio can transmit or the interference constraint which the primary receiver imposes on this cognitive radio transmitter. So here this interference is actually interference constraint is actually INR constraint, and that is given on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is the mean secondary use of cognitive, SU is cognitive radio capacity. And these three curves are drawn basically for three types of transmit powers the cognitive radio can use. And you can see that there are two kind of regimes in these curves. There's an asymptotic regime and a sort of linear growth regime. The linear growth regime is that the cognitive radio can transmit at more power, but it is being restricted by the low interference constraint being imposed by the primary receiver. As soon as it's able to increase the low interference constraint from, say, -15 to -10, there's more capacity available to the cognitive radio. So what then finally your asymptotic regime is that the cognitive radio, even though it may have more ability to transmit at more power, it is being restricted by the interference constraint of the cognitive radio receiver. So we remember those three paradigms I said, and one of them was knowing the channel state information precisely from the cognitive radio transmitter to the primary receiver. This is not a trivial question. Usually the mobiles send the information back to the base stations, and the base stations do then channel estimation. But here there are two independent systems, a primary system and a secondary system, and the secondary system has to estimate the information of the radio path between itself and the primary receiver. And there could be an error in this estimation. So the primary may say, I have a feeling, Mr. Secondary, that you will not estimate this information correctly. So although I can put up with a level Q, but I think you ought to come up with a much lower interference to me, because you are not able to estimate this channel correctly. And I'm going to be reasonable with you. I'm going to allow you to exceed this interference constraint for maybe 5% of the time. So depending upon, and the cognitive radio has no choice but to live with it, because it's secondary in the radio regulations, it has secondary status. But the cognitive radio will say to itself, well, in that case, I am going to experience a capacity loss because I am not able to transmit at the maximum power. So you can see there is a capacity loss if the channel is not correctly estimated. So the results of these preliminary studies are very encouraging, but they assume that the primary systems can accept a loss of performance due to the degraded SNR, or they can accept a reduced coverage area. So clearly, as I said, this depends on the application, and cellular radio systems are probably not that tolerant to this additional interference. So my conclusions are a letter to the MED, probably Chris Pereira, I suppose, or Chris's boss. Dear MED, cognitive radios has some encouraging answers to the spectrum gridlock, but not every band is suitable for cognitive radio applications. And bands below about 3.5 gigahertz, not all the bands, are becoming as the cellular bands. Now I am encouraged by the occupancy results which Auckland University measured. Today, most of the bands below 1 gigahertz are cellular bands, and they said that spectrum was heavily used. So this kind of reinforces that conclusion. And there is another letter to the MED that we have encouraging answers to the spectrum gridlock from the two studies I presented. So about how to deal with the radio regulations so that the cognitive radios can operate. That concludes my presentation.
Mansour,
Yes.
you've made a what one could say is what one would expect an impassioned speech to say that not in your patch. And Ian's made an impassioned speech to say not in his patch. Does that mean we've only got defence left?
No, well, I cannot comment about what Ian has said. Also, the digital TV frequency plan, etc., is currently going through, as Ian says, a national discussion process, so we don't know what the final plan would be. But I would like to think that the cognitive radios are going to be used for short-range applications, and therefore the use of frequencies above 3.5 gigahertz, etc., is not going to be an issue for them, because the distances which the cognitive radios are going to cover or will be of the order of maybe tens of meters or at most 100 meters. So using 3.5 gigahertz or using 5 gigahertz or using bands where there is a large amount of spectrum available and all these adjacent channel issues which I talked about go away isn't going to be a problem.
Will it also be helped by the fact that a lot of those bands are used for fixed links and therefore are more deterministic?
Yes, and also as we heard from someone this morning, fixed links have very directive antennas, so in that sense, yes, there was a lot of tolerance to interference as well in those bands.
No, when you're standing right next to them.
Yeah, stand in front of the
That's in my backyard.
Is there any place do you think for cognitive radio and the mid-band gaps in the future INT systems?
Well, I think those mid-band gaps are already used here. There is no vacancy. The mid-band gap is not vacant. I do not know the what is in there. I think that's Brian Miller's or the Chris Breers will tell you, but they are not vacant.
I don't remember seeing many licenses, Master.